I never liked abandoned places. They always felt strange, like walking into a house where no one's lived for years but still feels occupied. But when my cousin Ezra suggested we camp near an old trade route outside town, I agreed. He had a way of making risky things sound like the best idea ever. The old merchant station is still out there, he said, stuffing snacks into his backpack. Nobody's been there in years. It's like camping in a piece of history. That part made me uneasy. If no one went there anymore, there had to be a reason. The place was ancient, just a dried-up riverbed and a few crumbling stone walls, where merchants used to stop on their long journeys. But Ezra was my ride, and once he got an idea in his head, there was no talking him out of it. We hiked for hours through tall grass and rocky hills, the sun beating down on our backs. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, just our footsteps crunching on dry ground. By sunset, we reached what was left of the outpost. Most of the buildings had collapsed, leaving only broken walls covered in weeds. The air felt heavy, like we had just stepped into a place that didn't want us there. Ezra, of course, didn't care. "This is perfect," he said, dropping his backpack and stretching like we were at a five-star resort. I wandered around, kicking at the dirt, and noticed something sticking out of the ground, an old metal buckle, half buried and rusted. I picked it up, running my fingers over its smooth, worn edges. "You ever think about the people who used to be here?" I asked. Ezra grinned. "They're long gone, or dead." His words gave me chills, but I laughed anyway, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Then we saw the lights. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Tiny flickers in the distance, floating along the dried-up riverbed. Ezra noticed them too. "You see that?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. I nodded. "Who else would be out here?" Ezra frowned. "Hikers?" We both knew that was a lie. Nobody hiked this far off the map. There weren't even trails. The lanterns, because that's what they looked like, moved in a slow, steady line. They didn't sway like someone was carrying them. Instead, they floated, smooth and weightless. No footsteps, no voices, just the distant flicker of pale light. "Maybe they're from some old houses nearby," Ezra whispered. "There are no houses," I said. "Nothing's out here." We stood frozen, watching as the lights drifted closer. Then they stopped. All of them. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, nothing happened. The lights hovered in place, flickering like candle flames in the wind. Then, without a sound, they turned toward us. My stomach clenched. "We need to go," I whispered. Ezra didn't argue this time. We started backing away, trying to stay quiet. Every step felt painfully loud in the silence. My ears strained for any sound, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but there was nothing. Just the suffocating stillness. Then, from somewhere between us and the lanterns, I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. Just a long, low sound like breath moving through dry leaves. My whole body went cold. "Run," I said. We didn't grab anything. Not our gear, not our food, nothing. We just ran. The ruins blurred past us, rocks and dirt slipping beneath our feet. My chest burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. The whispering grew louder, curling around us like something unseen was just inches away. By the time we reached Ezra's car, my hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the handle. We threw ourselves inside, locked the doors, and Ezra jammed the keys into the ignition with trembling fingers. The headlights cut through the darkness. Nothing. The ruins stood silent, untouched. No lights, no figures, just empty space. The next morning, a park ranger called us. They had found our campsite exactly as we left it, Tent still pitched, fire pit undisturbed. No footprints, no lanterns, no sign that anyone, except us, had ever been there. We never spoke about it again, and we never went back. I've never liked driving late at night. It's not the dark that bothers me or even the empty roads. It's the feeling that anything could happen, and you wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. But I didn't have much of a choice. That night, my little brother Sam and I were on a road trip to visit our uncle's house. We had planned to leave early in the morning, but as always, Sam kept forgetting things. First it was his backpack, then it was his phone charger, and just when I thought we were finally ready, he ran back inside for his sneakers. By the time we actually hit the road, the sun was already sinking behind the hills. We had been driving for hours, and we stopped at a gas station to fill up. It was the last one for miles, so I topped off the tank, bought a couple of snacks, and got back. On the road, the highway stretched out ahead of us, long and quiet, with nothing but open fields on either side. Sam had dozed off in the passenger seat, his head against the window, snoring softly. I envied him. That's when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another car on the road. But as the minutes passed, something felt off. The car wasn't trying to pass me, and no matter how fast or slow I went, it stayed right behind us. I tapped the brakes lightly, flashing my taillights. No change. I slowed down. The car slowed too. I sped up. It matched my speed exactly. A knot tightened in my stomach. I reached over and shook Sam's shoulder. "Wake up," I whispered. "Something's not right." "Huh?" He rubbed his eyes groggily and looked behind us. "Who's that?" "I don't know," I said, my voice tight. The car stayed close, never getting any nearer but never backing off either. Then, suddenly, the headlights turned off. My heart nearly stopped. We were still moving, but now I couldn't see them. They were out there in the pitch-black night following us, but without their lights on. "What the?" Sam whispered. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands slick with sweat. We needed to stop soon, but the gas gauge was already dipping toward empty. "There's a town ahead," I muttered. "We'll stop there." Sam nodded, his eyes now wide open. He pulled out his phone. "No service?" "Of course." A few minutes later, we spotted a small diner with a flickering neon open sign. There was an old gas pump out front, so I pulled in, parking as close as I could to the building. Sam didn't waste a second. He jumped out and hurried toward the entrance. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands as I reached for the gas pump. Then I looked up. The car had stopped just down the road. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, thin, moving slowly, like he wasn't in a hurry. He didn't come toward us. He just stood there, watching. I forced myself to breathe. I needed to get the gas pumping fast. My hands fumbled with the nozzle as I tried to act like I wasn't terrified. Then, the door to the diner banged open. A woman in a grease-stained apron stepped outside. She looked tough, the kind of person who'd been running this place for years and had seen just about everything. "You kids need help?" she called out. I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the man. She followed my gaze, her expression darkening. "That guy with you?" I shook my head. "No," she sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. Then she stepped further onto the porch, crossing her arms. "You got about 10 seconds to get lost before I call the sheriff," she said, loud and clear. The man didn't move. She took another step forward. I said. Before she could finish, the man turned, got back into his car and sped off, his tires kicking up dust as he disappeared into the night. The woman didn't say anything for a moment. Then she exhaled and muttered, "Town gets its fair share of weirdos." She gave me a nod. "You two better keep moving." I didn't need to be told twice. The gas pump clicked off, and I quickly screwed the cap back on. Sam was already in the car before I even opened my door. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just drove. After a while, Sam broke the silence. "What do you think he wanted?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to know. I just kept driving. And I never looked back. This happened a while ago, back in 2014, I think. I live in a town surrounded by dense forests, the kind of place where you can drive an hour in any direction and find small, quiet campgrounds. It's great if you like the outdoors. And back. Then I did. I had a 4-day weekend off work and hadn't been out in nature for a while, so I decided to go on a solo camping trip. I picked a small, remote campground about 45 minutes from town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a dirt parking area with 3 campsites nearby. Each one had an old fire pit, a rusty grill, and a couple of worn-out benches. Not the best, but good enough for a quiet weekend alone. When I arrived, I saw that all 3 campsites were empty. No other cars, no signs of people. Perfect. I picked the farthest spot, grabbed my gear, and set up camp. Even though it was only a 5-minute walk from my truck to the site, the dense trees made it feel like I was deep in the woods. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I wasn't used to camping alone, and without any distractions. Time felt like it was crawling. I figured there might be a hiking trail nearby, so I walked back to the entrance to check. That's when I noticed it. Another car had pulled up next to mine. It was an old, rusty red Toyota, beat up, covered in dents and scratches. But the weirdest part? It didn't have a license plate. Not in the front, not in the back. I felt uneasy. There was no rule against an old car being parked at a campsite, but something about it just felt wrong. Still, I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe someone else had come to camp just like me. Since there wasn't a trail, I headed back to my campsite, sat down on a log, and tried to relax. 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. A man was walking toward me from the trail. He didn't have a backpack or any camping gear, just himself. And he wasn't just passing through. He was looking right at me, like he was coming over specifically to talk to me. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, but something about him made him seem older, like life had worn him down. His brown jacket was full of holes, stained and dirty. His beard and hair were greasy and unkempt. He looked rough. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he asked. I didn't have much to do, so I shrugged and said, "Sure." But then he quickly added, "Not now. Just asking for later. I've got to take care of a few things first, but I'll come back and get you when I'm ready." That struck me as odd. Why ask me for help if he didn't need it yet? Why not wait until he was actually ready? Still, I just said, "Okay." He smiled, thanked me, and walked away. I sat there, waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. Then the sun was setting, and I figured he must have handled whatever it was on his own. I forgot about it. A couple of hours later, I was cooking dinner over the fire when I heard footsteps again, but this time, I couldn't see him right away. The trail behind me was completely dark, swallowed by the night. I could hear him walking, though, crunching slowly over the gravel. Step by step, he came closer, his figure gradually emerging from the darkness into the glow of my campfire. It was him. "Hey, you ready?" "Just need a little help," he said. I hesitated. "With what?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there smiling in a way that felt off. Not friendly, not normal. "It'll only take a minute," he said, almost joking. "You're not too busy, right?" I didn't like the way he said that. He was being pushy, almost like he was testing me. A smart person would have said no, but I wasn't smart. I didn't want to seem rude, and honestly, I had no good reason to refuse. So even though my gut was screaming at me, I sighed and said, All right. He smiled again and started leading the way. The further we walked from my fire, the darker it got, and that's when I realized something else. He didn't have a flashlight. He had walked all the way to my campsite, through pitch-black woods, without a single light source. That didn't make sense. The deeper we went, the more wrong everything felt. My heartbeat sped up. My hands got sweaty. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me. So, what exactly do you need help with? I asked. For a split second, he slowed down like he was about to answer, but then he just kept walking, and he didn't say a word. Something was seriously wrong. The silence around us felt heavier, like the woods themselves were waiting for something to happen. I slowed down, letting a little distance form between us. He must have noticed because suddenly, he stopped walking. Then he turned around, and he wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes flicked down toward me, toward my hand, which was edging toward my pocket, where my phone and keys were. And then I saw it. His hand started reaching into his jacket. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just sprinted straight into the woods. Behind me, I heard him running too. His heavy footsteps pounded against the ground, his breathing loud and fast. For 2 minutes, maybe longer, I ran as hard as I could. My heart felt like it was going to explode, but I didn't stop. Then his footsteps slowed, and then, nothing. Silence. I kept running, not caring which direction I was going. Eventually, I stopped just long enough to grab my phone and call 911. When the police arrived, only my truck was there. The red Toyota was gone, and so was the man. I gave them a full description of him, his car, everything. But they said it wasn't enough to go on. The lack of a license plate meant nothing could be traced. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I have a pretty good guess. The scariest part? He planned it. He came by during the day so I'd recognize him. He made small talk so I'd be more likely to follow him later. He waited until it was late, when the woods were completely dark and silent. He knew exactly what he was doing. I just hope no one else falls for it. Or worse, already.